Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, colleges and universities are now open. Well, they're open all year round, but the students are now back in full force. We're going to talk about higher education with the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. But first, how about this? Legislative misconduct. How can it be handled? We're going to chat with a couple of the state's leading reporters about that and maybe Governor Wolf's fall agenda. As they say, let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have many subjects to cover in the next half hour, and joining me to discuss those subjects is Marc Levy. He's with the Associated Press, and Angela Couloumbis. She's with the Philadelphia Inquirer. Two reporters will put up their Twitter accounts. You can Twitter handle. You can follow them. I would suggest you do it. You'll learn a lot about what's going on in state and national government. All right, Angela. Hundreds of complaints have been filed over the past several years about state government employees in general with a variety of misconduct charges. But in particular, there's growing concern about state lawmakers, and I presume this includes the staff of state lawmakers as well. And it basically could be all misconduct,
yes,
but it also hinges to some extent on sexual abuse and
yes,
sexual harassment. Take it.
So this past week, a Dauphin County grand jury that was investigating misconduct allegations against a former state lawmaker issued a report in which they recommended that a new independent office be established to investigate all misconduct claims, including sexual including sexual misconduct claims in the state legislature. That means members, elected members, and members of their staff. Mm-hmm. The idea being you take that responsibility of investigating misconduct out of the legislature's hands so that the legislature is not policing itself, and you have an outside entity doing that.
Yeah. Has the reaction been?
It's been pretty tepid in the legislature, and
I wonder why.
Historically speaking, this is a legislature that likes to expand its power, and so by allowing some sort of independent entity to investigate it, that would be diminishing its own power, its own control, and that's not something that
Does the legislature have to agree to this? The lawmakers themselves, once it's set up, are they compelled by rule or by policy to?
I would think that anything that on this subject the legislature would have to approve. They would have to allow something to investigate it. Right. Yes. I mean, there are prosecutors' offices out there, but on this,
right, legislation needs to be passed to approve this. I don't want to leave people thinking that there are no mechanisms in place currently in the state legislature, but they really reside within the body. There are ethics committees that look into some of these issues.
And the point is, it ought to be independent of lawmakers and the relationships with each other, right?
Right, because fundamentally what you have is lawmakers policing themselves and each other.
All right, well, a guy named Governor Wolf is well into his second term, and typically we get to a point where the governor's legislative goals are put on, I'll put it mildly, on the back burner. We'll probably next year you'll come on and we'll be talking about maybe the presidential election, but also who's going to succeed Governor Wolf, who's term limited. So what would the governor like to do if he had his way?
So he's been loading up for his fall agenda. The legislature is back in the second or third week of September, and they'll have a session through December. And the governor is adding things to his agenda on guns, on charter schools.
Right.
He had a couple big items that stalled in June when the legislature wrapped up for the summer. And, there's conventional wisdom out there that says that a second-term governor has a very short window to get things done. At some point, he becomes a lame duck.
Sure.
Some people see it as 1 year. His first year is the time he has to get something big and potentially controversial done.
Well, gun control, I mean, there's public sentiment anyway to strengthen background checks, assault weapon ban. I mean, Pennsylvania has not been an easy legislature to conduct and get gun control legislation through.
Yeah, we've looked actually, the Inquirer in conjunction with the Post-Gazette has looked at some of the legislation that has been introduced in the last decade, and most of those pieces of legislation have never even gotten past a committee vote. If that tells you anything about how difficult it is to move these types of pieces. Now, the governor last month actually signed an executive order to try and tackle the issue of gun violence. This came after very high-profile shootings in Philadelphia.
Sure.
And one of the things that he is looking to do is create 2 new offices that would study the issue and make recommendations to the legislature for bills that can be and should be passed. One of them being the extreme risk bill, which...
Yeah, but overall, it's been generally tough to get these bills, would you agree, through the legislature?
Oh, yeah.
itself?
So last year, a bill did pass after the NRA dropped its opposition to it, and this dealt with people who have restraining orders pending against them, that they would more quickly lose their guns.
All right.
It only passed once the NRA dropped its opposition to it, once it was tweaked.
Okay.
But that was the first bill in a decade that dealt directly with gun control that had passed in the state legislature.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to get back to charter schools. It's a hot issue right now, but we also then have to deal with a closing of another prison. We'll get to that and more after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, I'm joined in this segment by 2 journalists, Marc Levy with the Associated Press and Angela Couloumbis with the Philadelphia Inquirer. All right, Marc, we were talking about gun control. We finished that subject. Let's get to charter schools. Obviously, the public schools in our state are not exactly wowed about charter schools because they have to put up some of the money. They say it's draining their resources. Give us an update on where all of that stands.
Yeah, look, I mean, so for like going on 8 or 9 years now, there's been a fight in the legislature over this. And schools are saying that an increasing amount of their money is going to charter schools, and that charter schools are getting more money than they actually need to educate these students. For this entire time, the legislature has been trying to expose charter schools to state transparency and ethic laws, and they've been unable to do that. So what the governor did is he ordered some regulations to be drawn up and written that would force charters under, to be exposed to state transparency and spending rules, ethical rules, and also to try to right-size the amount of money they get for each student.
All right, now when it comes to the whole business of prison closing, crime overall is down, but I mean, every day I read accounts of shootings here and there and horrible with people not just being shot, but people being killed, particularly with guns. That's part of the gun control debate. But overall, crime is down, and so what?
Yeah, look,
what's the prison situation?
There's a lot going on. For one thing, the state is seeing fewer inmates coming into the system. One thing that's causing that is courts are sentencing fewer people to prison for a variety of reasons. One is that crime rates are down. Another is that the state has made concerted efforts to keep parolees on the street and out of prison, being sent back to prison. So they're closing another prison. They closed one in 2017. And this will be part of sort of the fall hubbub in the legislature.
Is that the current proposal is for Luzerne County. Is that
That's
correct?
right. Retreat State Prison in Luzerne County. Its original buildings date to the 19th century, and it is the smallest prison in terms of number of beds. So it is vulnerable from that standpoint.
Will there be a debate in the legislature over this?
There's a hearing. So what came out of the 2017 prison closing was a law that requires a hearing before the state can close a prison. So that will happen in 3 months, and after that, the state believes it needs 4 months to sort of wind down Retreat State Prison. There's about 1,000 inmates there. But, you know, just to your point about shootings, crime rates are down, gun violence is down, but only if you're including armed robberies. I was looking at crime stats over the past couple decades. Murders are up. Murders are up. Aggravated assaults are relatively in the same ballpark as they've been over the past couple decades, but when people say gun violence is down, it's because of armed robberies are way down. That's both in Pennsylvania and nationally.
Right. But we're still under considerable pressure given what's happened nationally and, as you pointed out, in Philadelphia to do something, but we'll have to wait and see, right?
Yes, and the other issue is that they don't, the legislature does not have a lot of session days in the fall.
Good point.
There's very limited amount of time to get these really hefty issues resolved.
And we know what's going on next year. They're up for re-election, and a little thing like a presidential election to occupy our attention, right?
Right, and conventional wisdom is they don't like to tackle controversial issues in a big election year.
All right, before I let both of you go, this is a here we go again. The minimum wage, the governor continues to support raising it immediately to $12, eventually going to $15 an hour. Where does that stand?
I think
is it going to come back up?
It likely will. There's a lot of calls from particularly the Democratic side for this issue to finally get resolved. All of our surrounding states have a higher minimum wage than Pennsylvania. And it is definitely very high on the governor's agenda. There have been some talks on the issue over the summer. I don't know that there has been a grand resolution yet.
Yeah, my sense is that they might not do $12 an hour, but they could do $10 an hour, $10.25, but what do I know? I thought that was something likely to happen. All right, well, I want to thank both of you for coming in. All right, coming up, let's take a look at higher education. As I indicated before, the college students are back, and colleges and universities are operating at full scale, I'll put it that way. We'll get into some higher education matters after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, you should know, as a college professor, I have to talk about higher education at some point throughout the year. And joining me to talk about this is Mike Wishnow. He's a senior vice president at the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. And Christina Mihalik, did I get that right?
You did, thank you.
See, there you go. She's the senior VP of Government Relations for the PA Credit Union Association. All right, Michael, I'm going to start with you. First of all, let's face now, college, we're not arguing that college is meant for everyone. People have to make that individual choice. So the way I'm going to put this, but if you decide to go to college, there are certain things and aspects of a college degree and a college education that matters. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, folks with a college degree make significantly more money over the course of their career than those that don't. Of course, there are very well-paying jobs for folks that want to come out of high school, but typically they also involve some sort of training. Yeah. One of the things, we were in Philadelphia recently.
Technical, vocational?
Yeah,
something.
Welders.
Oh.
They need welders at the shipyard like you wouldn't believe, and those welders are making $80,000 a year to start. But in order to be a welder, you have to go through an 18-month apprenticeship. So, you know, there's additional schooling. It's not necessarily college, but usually if there's additional schooling, then how do you pay for that additional schooling, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the need for vocational and technical education is very, very important in our society because it's not just welders, but there's a whole variety of people in industries and occupations that are crying for assistance, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the challenge with that is the financial gap, because you're seeing with student lending, it's outpacing healthcare costs and also housing costs. So, in fact, I believe it's one of the most expensive out of 4 things we're going to be purchasing over our lifespan. So
yeah, and also it has increased, way outstripped inflation. If you look at what a college education cost 20 years ago versus
student
today.
debt. I mean, many colleges and universities are, really nervous and concerned about student debt and trying to raise money through scholarships and a whole variety of other, and make efficiency. I'll say cutbacks, but I don't really mean cutbacks, but just get concerned about the efficiency and the delivery of the educational services. So, but the fees continue to rise, correct?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But there are options out there with government subsidized loans. You have the Stafford loan.
Absolutely.
Unsubsidized, it's a fixed rate of 6.8%. You do have to demonstrate a financial need. And over the life of the loan, government can pay for it for you.
Right.
You pay the interest later, and there's also a subsidized loan where the borrower would pay the interest in school or defer it later.
And it's become a big issue in the presidential election. Several of the candidates have come up with programs such as eliminating all student debt. Bernie Sanders, I think, says for everybody, regardless of the family income. Elizabeth Warren's program is based on family income, how much of a reduction you get. So student debt is not just a local issue.
Absolutely, it's an issue for everyone. And again, when you approach your child going off to college, or if you yourself are going off to college, you always start with grants. Where can I get grant money? Can I get grant money from the government? Can I get grant money from the college? There are a lot of local grants. If you do your research, a lot of our credit unions give grants. So you start with grant money before you start talking about loans. But then you can talk about loans, and as Christina said, you have the government-sponsored loans.
Right.
But typically, most people, if they go to a public college, they're still, over the course of a 4-year degree, about a $35,000 gap between what they can get.
And that's
in
sort of the
loans.
average debt, if I recall, somewhere in the mid-30s. Is that right?
If you're in a public college. If you're in a private school, it's closer to $100,000.
I'm glad I'm seated. Let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the credit crunch and how easy it is to get assistance, and we'll get into that subject. For any of you who have students out there, kids out there getting ready to college, this is an important discussion.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, Christina, let's start with you. There seems to be a credit crunch. You've referred to it as a collapse of the secondary market. I have no clue what the secondary market is. That's why we have these folks here who are going to help us out. So what's the credit crunch? We're talking about borrowing money to go to college. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there's a credit crunch. What's the crunch?
The crunch is lenders are retracting because of the market fallout, but there are options out there, particularly with credit unions and even local financial institutions that are filling that void.
Yeah, I mean, basically what the secondary market is they buy these loans. And the secondary market over the last 5 or 6 years has not been buying as much or pricing as favorably. So many lenders are pulling out. The only ones that can lend are the ones that are holding on to those loans themselves, which are typically credit unions or local banks.
So this leads me to an important question for our viewers out there who have children, kids coming along and they're going to go to college and they have to, how would you start the whole process?
Well, you start it with the FAFSA, which is the federal form that the parents have to fill out based on their income.
I got it.
Okay? And once you go there, you assess the need. You start with the financial aid office at the college, and they'll walk you through, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
And there's grant, I mean, as we discussed, there's the Stafford loan. There's also the PLUS loan for parents to explore on behalf of their children. You don't have to demonstrate a financial need. It's similar setup, it's guaranteed. And then there's also the direct loans from local financial institutions like credit unions that can also fill that void.
Yeah, one of the things you've put out, and I want to get to this before the end of the program, tips to manage student loan debt. You have it there. Let's just go through this. So let's go ahead. Start with, I want to go through each one of these because this is important for the folks out there. Go ahead. Tips to manage.
The biggest tip is borrow only the amount that you need for your school.
Absolutely.
For your schooling, your tuition, your fees. Don't go over and above that.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is some of the lenders will lend you extra money, and some of the students will take it, and it'll be pocket money, and they'll blow it on McDonald's or whatever the heck else, and they don't realize they're paying for that for 20 years.
Yeah. The second one it has to do, I'll stay with you, is government loans.
Yeah, we talked about that. The hierarchy really is grants, government loans to the student, government loans to the parent, private loans.
Yeah. But you also have to be concerned with the interest rates, particularly if you're out in the private sector.
Absolutely. And that's where you need to shop around, look for the best deal, and go local. You know, your local credit union, even a local community bank, financial institution. Sometimes you'll actually find a better rate and opportunities.
Yeah. So this seems like a no-brainer, but you're supposed to calculate your total debt, and then maybe you can even refinance it at some point?
Absolutely.
Is that sort of like a mortgage? You take a mortgage out, you might have a higher interest rate, they drop, and then you refinance it?
Yes, because if you think about it, Terry, you're probably taking these loans semester by semester. And so each semester, you're getting a different loan at a different rate. So over the course of your 4-year degree, and some kids take 5, interest rates can change. So you're going to have some that are higher, some that are lower, depending on what the market does.
Yeah.
And at the end of the process, if you can refinance to get them all at a lower rate, you're going to be in better shape.
Yeah, and there's actually something I never knew about loan forgiveness. You can get loans forgiven. How do you get loans forgiven?
You work with your financial institution. You know, the best bet is to work with your
And they're going to let you be out of a
a lot of times what happens is specific occupations. So, for example, if you go and you work at an inner city school, there might be some loan forgiveness after you work for a certain period of time if you're a teacher, or if you're a health professional. If you go into a rural area where they're having a hard time recruiting health professionals. A lot of times that loan forgiveness comes from employers seeking to attract candidates.
And you have something called, we're going to end on this, extra principal when possible.
Yes.
What's that mean?
It's kind of in the same sense, same vein of credit card debt. You want to pay as your highest loan first, and also pay more into the principal, so you're reducing that loan sooner than later, I would say.
wonder how many folks actually go through all of these steps. I mean, they're critically important, it seems to me, and there's so much student debt out there that this is, I want to thank you both for coming in. This is really and truly an important discussion. All right, as they say, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.